bodies don't skip a step. What that means is they're more thorough than our culture likes to admit or acknowledge or prepare us for. And when we have had to disconnect from our bodies are faithful enough to our congruent, healing, whole person process that they won't let us miss anything. And so what that means is if we've been disconnected from our bodies for years and we all of a sudden start paying attention, sometimes it's as if our bodies are saying, hey, great, I'm so glad you're paying attention. Here are all of the things that you missed. Sometimes we can get flooded. And so the recognition that isn't proof that our bodies are bad, that is actually proof that our bodies have been paying attention and aware and online the whole time.
Hey friends, welcome back to the Broken to Beloved podcast. If you're looking for practical resources for recovery from and safeguarding against spiritual abuse, then this is the place for you. I'm your host, Brian Lee. As an ordained pastor and abuse survivor, I know what it feels like navigating life after spiritual abuse. I also know what it's like to want to prevent anything from happening to the people you know and love. It's why Broken to Beloved exists. And we can't do this work alone. We need your help. Support our work by becoming a donor to help make our podcast and programs possible. Just head to brokentobeloved.org/support or click the link to donate in the show notes. We are celebrating 1 year of the podcast today. And in just 1 year, you've tuned in from all 50 states and 89 countries around the world. We just hit 40,000 downloads, and it's all because of you. We are so thankful to our listeners and for all of our guests who have come to share and offer their wisdom, insight, and expertise over this last year. This season, I'm looking forward to sharing more of these amazing conversations with you. We're kicking off season 3 today with Dr. Hillary McBride as we talk about her new book, Holy Hurt. Hillary is a registered psychologist, researcher, and podcaster with expertise that includes trauma, embodiment, psychedelic therapy, and the intersection of spirituality and mental health. Her books include the bestseller, The Wisdom of Your Body, and Practices for Embodied Living. She's been recognized by the American Psychological Association and the Canadian Psychological Association for her research and clinical work. In addition to being a teaching faculty at the University of British Columbia, she's an ambassador for Sanctuary Mental Health and the host of CBC's award-winning podcast, Other People's Problems. Hillary makes her home in the Pacific Northwest in British Columbia, Canada. And now, here's my conversation with our new friend, Hillary. Hillary, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
It's an honor to have you. You read a lot of material in preparation for this book. A lot.
Yeah.
You said, I think, 100 academic articles, which is a marathon in and of itself. But then you went to read 50 dissertations, 24 other books, the earliest of which you said was published in 1991. Was it The Subtle Power of Spiritualism? Was it a different one? I think that was the first
good question.
one I read.
Yeah, good question at this point.
Well, and I was surprised to find that it was published in the 90s because it felt like it could have been written today when I was reading that one. I'm wondering for you, after all this research, why was now the time for you to write this book?
Sometimes there are these kind of inflection points where something becomes inevitable in a way. And I was actually talking to some friends of mine, Kendra and Emily, recently, who were saying, you don't write a book unless you have to write a book. Like I've also heard Sophie Strand in her most recent book, The Body's a Doorway, talked about writing is like this. I can't remember the word in the original language, but the rough translation is something like the gremlin. Like there's something that is just coming through. Like it just has to happen. And it felt that way with this book. Like I've been writing and researching and talking in smaller settings and in media about spiritual trauma for a while now, probably 8 or 9 years. And yet there was something about listening to the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill podcast that made me feel like, oh no, this is coming out of me. And I think it was really like, just as a traumatologist, as a trauma specialist, as a trauma survivor, one of the things that is so important about trauma is that it really betrays our perception of individualism in our culture, because all it takes is listening to one person's story told in the right way about the wrong thing that happened to them for our bodies to start feeling like, oh no, I feel unsafe now. I'm remembering my trauma. I'm remembering the thing that happened to me. Like trauma really is kind of like these invisible to the eye, to the naked eye, like spider webs that connect us to each other. And I felt it listening to that podcast. I heard it from a ton of other people listening to the podcast, that when we're hearing people name and articulate their stories of spiritual and religious trauma, but we don't have a framework through which to understand it or even recognize that that's what's going on, it's so appropriate for our bodies to start feeling scared and anxious and angry, and we don't know why. And so I'm really passionate about us being, just creating resources around and mental health literacy, especially because in a lot of contexts where there has been religious abuse and like spiritual abuse and spiritual trauma, people are often deprived of the information to make sense of why it hurts so much inside or why they feel so bad. So it was really a combination of many, many years of interest and passion and experience and professional work to right to that point, though, of hearing that podcast and going, oh, I've got more to say about this.
Yes. And I think that podcast came out right around the same time I was dealing with my third experience of it, but the first time having language for it. And so, like you're saying, hearing those stories was just such an alarm bell for me of recognizing, okay, it's not just me. I'm not crazy. I'm not alone. And also looking for the language, because I was in my own counseling and therapy at the time and got the first word for religious trauma or spiritual abuse, which has got me down the rabbit hole of reading all the books and doing all the things. Language is so important. I'm curious why you choose in the book to call it spiritual trauma and not religious trauma. Is there a specific reason?
Yeah, I think that spiritual trauma is actually a more encompassing term for the kind of hurt that happens across a variety of experiences, spectrums, locations, relationships. It comes back to the fact that at our core, we are spiritual beings. And I'm not suggesting that we all are oriented towards religious experiences or religious communities, but spirituality, when we understand what it means, really takes us back to the core dimension of our humanness that propels us towards connection, towards meaning making. If anyone has ever asked the question, why am I here? That's proof you're spiritual. If anyone else, if anybody in the world has ever, listening to the podcast, has said, I want to belong. Right? Spiritual. If anyone has said, I want to make something, you're spiritual, right? So our creativity, our expansiveness, our expression, our longing for a relationship, our longing for meaning making, those are dimensions of our spirituality. And what we know is that if we are experiencing an injury that fractures our sense of innate goodness, our sense of trust in the world, that makes us believe on some level that we are unsafe or we are bad, those experiences, whether they happen in encounters of sexual abuse or sexual trauma, even a natural disaster, those are impacting our spirituality. And so when I use the term spiritual trauma, what I'm including is the way that there are injuries to our spirituality that can happen outside of a religious context that are extremely valid and legitimate. And actually, you probably saw this in the book, but the definition of trauma that I really like to use when it comes to spiritual trauma is influenced heavily by Michelle Panchuk's work. She's a philosopher who's written about this. And the idea is that spiritual trauma is anything that it's a kind of trauma that's caused by something a person closely associates with religion or spirituality, or somebody who's a stand-in for the divine, or is justified by spiritual practices, or occurs because of religious or spiritual worldviews. But then in addition to that, the survivor believes that spirituality is somehow the cause, or that there is a post-trauma response that's connected to spirituality, God, religion in some way. So what that means is, yes, there are traumas that happen inside a religious context, but there are also worldviews, ideas, meaning-making structures that religion hands us that we're carrying with us through our whole lives that are then impacting, the kid who gets abused by the soccer coach. What meaning are they making of that? And you might think, well, that's not religious abuse. It didn't happen in a church. It didn't happen in the hands of clergy. But if that child was given a story that says, if you suffer, it's because God is teaching you a lesson, and then that child ends up experiencing some suffering and their meaning-making structure around it is that God is responsible for this, there is a word for that might not fit within what we would call religious abuse.
Yeah.
Right? It's way broader than that.
Yeah. It covers so much more. I appreciate that clarification. And I love that you connect spirituality to connection. And I think you say, quote, everything in our material bodies is telling a spiritual story. And there is no spiritual trauma that is not also physical, relational, and psychological, and vice versa. I love Alison Cook's contributions, both in the book and the podcast. She says, we can't bifurcate the body from the soul, so all trauma is probably spiritual trauma on some level. And when she said that, when I was listening to the podcast, I was like, that hit me. I was like, that's exactly it. There's nothing that it doesn't touch in a part of us
That's
that,
right.
like you're saying, wants to belong, wants to
That's right.
create, is asking, what is the meaning of it all? And so recognizing for people to be able to name that what happened to me is trauma on some level, and it happens on a spiritual level as well, to be able to make those connections and recognize what's been fractured or ruptured is the beginning of looking for or moving toward healing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I love that. Thank you. That's so helpful. So for people who aren't aware or are having difficulty finding the language to name their experience, how do you help?
Well, I think that, it's how do we name something that we don't even aren't even aware exists is like an interesting philosophical quandary. But what I could say is that I think when we are paying attention to our bodies are always going to tell us information that could potentially subvert power structures that are abusive to us, or could tell us where the injury is, and can also tell us where the pathway to healing is. And so when I'm thinking about people who have a hard time putting words on what happened, I always like to come back to the body. I'm imagining that our bodies are saying all the time, this scares me, this hurts, I don't feel safe, this isn't okay. It's almost like our body can say with sensation what at times is unknowable to us through the realm of words. I think that it's interesting in spiritual contexts where there has been more higher instances of trauma or abuse, is that people are often cut off from other people who can help them name their experience or put words to what's happening or give them information around it. And it's a part of part of what makes these systems abusive and traumatic is that people there's like such a poverty of education and language around the psychological aspect of the human experience that there's almost like a deprivation of appropriate knowledge and insight. Because we could say like, well, it's just like, it's not been important to certain faith communities, but you could also look at it from a more maybe like sinister perspective to say it's really convenient to disconnect people from information that would otherwise make them critical of the system that they're in. So you could say this is like a particular kind of abuse tactic, is to deprive people of information that helps them think critically about what system they're in. But I just can't underscore enough how important it is to both have access to information about psychological development and access to relationships with people outside of the communities that we've been a part of, as well as to the beginnings of intimacy with bodily sensation. Like, what is my body saying? Because again, that is also something that people are taught to mistrust. And what I'll say, just, like this feels kind of like a bomb to drop, or like a pin to pull in the grenade sometimes, but to say, I think people who are disconnected from their bodies are much easier to control.
Yeah.
And when we are disconnected from our bodies, then we don't, and we learn to mistrust our bodies, and our bodies seem to be the proof of our bad, evil, sinful nature. Well, it becomes really easy to mistrust our body's cues that say, I'm scared, this doesn't feel safe. When actually that's the thing that would highlight there's some trauma here. This isn't feeling okay.
That's so important. And I want to come back and ask more about the body in a second. But there's a quote right at the beginning of the book in terms of trying to name our experiences, where you write, quote, after all, how do you pinpoint something that was woven into the very fabric of your development? How do you name a wound when the source of the trauma cut you off from knowing you were wounded in the first place?
Yeah.
And you write about families of origin, and you write about systems theory, and so many other things that help us to look backwards to discover, sometimes for the first time with an awareness of what it is about our story or about our experiences growing up that has sort of primed us for what we've experienced today. And I think it's so helpful to know that when we are trying to name things or trying to identify and listen to our bodies that are trying to tell us, hey, something's wrong here, to just be curious enough or patient enough to be curious and say, okay, well, what are you trying to tell me? Because we have been taught so often to spiritually bypass and to over spiritualize things and to divorce our spirit from our body or from our feelings, or that our heart is deceitful above all things, and all these phrases that we pick up.
Right.
And I appreciate you saying that, like you're saying, it primes us for more abuse when we are divorced from our bodies.
Yeah, you're so right.
It's so helpful.
Yeah, maybe I'll just say on that note too, like one of the things that I encounter so much in my clinical work is people who know intellectually that they've been disconnected from their bodies, and know intellectually, okay, just enough to say, yeah, this is something I want to be able to do. I want to reconnect to the body, but it is terrifying to do so. And I like to think about bodies as bodies don't skip a step. What that means is they're more thorough than our culture likes to admit or acknowledge or prepare us for. And when we have had to disconnect from our bodies are faithful enough to our congruent, healing, whole person process that they won't let us miss anything. They won't let anything go unnoticed. And so what that means is, if we've been disconnected from our bodies for years and we all of a sudden start paying attention, sometimes it's as if our bodies are saying, hey, great, I'm so glad you're paying attention. Here are all of the things that you missed about every single time you felt terrified, and all of the things that proved to you that, you felt sad and not okay. And so we start to reconnect to our bodily knowing, and what we meet is an overwhelming amount of sensation, of emotion. Sometimes we can get flooded.
Yeah.
And so the recognition that isn't proof that our bodies are bad. That is actually proof that our bodies have been paying attention and aware and online the whole time, and are really, really wanting for us to be able to integrate and make sense of all of the things that happened, including the things that don't have names, but have a lot of feeling attached to them.
Yeah, that's so helpful. You write, quote, our bodies need to know we are safe so that we can move forward without our coping strategies overwhelming us to the point where we're damaged not only by the initial trauma, but also by how we try to manage the pain of it. End quote. So how, when we are being flooded, or when we've been denying or ignoring or repressing our bodily sensations for so long, how do we help our bodies to find and sense that safety?
Well, practically speaking, it's really good to know that we still have agency. One of the things that we don't learn in religious contexts is that we have a voice, that our voice can be worth listening to, that we can say no, that we can take breaks, that we can have boundaries. Like, one of the things that I think is fundamentally missing for most people in terms of their psychosocial development in a highly controlling religious environments is the right and the access to the skill of saying no. So what we can do as we're starting to pay attention to our bodies is recognize, this might feel like a lot. I can take a break from this, right? I can shut this off. It's okay. It's okay to shut it off and then come back to it. And when we look at it through the lens of somatic work, we would call that titration. It's right the way that, this is a lot. We kind of like touch in on something and then move away from it. So boundaries, saying yes for a time, saying no for a time. I think relationship is essential for many of us. There has been a deprivation of the absolutely vital experience of having another person who is not afraid of our emotion walk into our emotion with us. There is a scholar, Diana Fosha, whose work I love. She's developed AEDP, which is one of the primary models of therapy that I use. And what she has talked about in terms of the development of psychopathology is that it emerges from the experience of unwilled and unwanted aloneness in the face of overwhelming emotion. And the reality is that even though we were not allowed to share emotion or feel it or trust our body, it was happening the whole time. So if we weren't allowed to stay in contact with it, but it was still happening, what that likely meant is that it was really alone inside of us, the things that felt scary, the longings, the desires, the anger, the sad. So being able to bring somebody in and say, like, climb into this with me might feel really scary and foreign, but is actually the thing that can make it tolerable. It's the thing that can make the emotion feel like, oh, whoa, okay, somebody's got me, even if I don't got me right now.
Yeah.
So we have titration, we have relationship, attunement, attachment, kind of all of these social resources that we can pull in. And then I think that even like good understanding is important, like even just a way to say to myself, like, this is a feeling, it will not kill me. I like to say to people in my therapy practice, the thing that you're feeling, you've already survived. Like you already made your way all the way through it. You have survived it. Your body is just remembering. So giving it a sense of time and place, like, oh, this terror is not because I'm actually being abused or assaulted right now. The terror is my body remembering what it felt like at that time, but I did actually already survive. So it's safe to feel it now. The bad thing isn't happening again. So even just like the language on that, I think can help us learn to tolerate it. It's really hard. Like I don't want to underscore or in some way oversell the strengths of feeling our body without also realistically representing like this is really, really hard stuff to do and takes a lot of time.
Yeah. Yeah. So for people who are feeling flooded or lack the resources or relationships, because I hear from a lot of people in our community who talk about that sense of just utter isolation.
Yeah.
I've been cut off from my community. I've lost my support system, whatever it is. You also write about feeling our feelings like with the language of riding the wave, right? Just letting them roll in. When we're sensing those things of either being flooded by emotions or unable to reach out to someone else, what is something we can do when we feel alone in that moment?
Yeah. Bodies are full of resources. So bodies are not just full of emotion that's terrifying to feel and full of the sadness and the pain of aloneness. Bodies are also full of wisdom and ancient insights that can support us through what's happening. So, for example, this comes from the practice of generative somatics, like the spine as the long line of dignity. Like what happens when I think about the bones and the structure inside my body as holding me up? Like there is something of nature that exists inside of me that knows how to hold me in the midst of all of this. Even if it feels like I'm collapsing into a pile of nothing, my bones, right? They provide some structure from the inside. Or what about looking at my hands and recognizing that my hands look like my mom's hands? Like I'm at the age now when I look down at my hands, I see what I remember my mom's hands looking like when I was a kid. And I look down and I think, wow, like I have a history of all sorts of people in my family. All the women in my family had hands that looked like this. They looked down and they saw their ancestors and their ancestors and their ancestors. So like what about even within my body? It's just a way of saying like our bodies are not just bags of distress or like trauma, the meat taxi that carries our brain around or this grab bag of trauma memories. Like there is so much more inside of our body. Or even things like breath. Like when I think about breath for me has been this incredibly mystical experience, which connects me to all living things. To think about breath as like, wow, the thing that animates everything, like all living beings breathe. Like, okay, here I am, a part of the family of things. And that I think in spite of our loneliness, what we need to remember is all of the ways that we are held by our non-human kin, by land, by ancestors, right? Like there is something I think about our individualistic Western colonial world, which has really cut us off from the community of aliveness that exists in nature itself. There are times when I have been so overwhelmed with grief that I thought there is no one and nothing that can know what this kind of pain feels like. And then I've laid flat on my back in the ocean. And when I think about what that was like for me, it was as if the ocean was big enough to show me, like, look how much I can hold, look at how much I can contain. And I'm not suggesting that, okay, you're lonely, right? Go make friends with some trees. Like, great, that'll substitute all of your need for intellectual stimulation and community. And like, who's going to bring you a meal when you're sick? Don't worry about it. Make friends with trees. But I think that there is something about recognizing what are the ways that I'm not alone that can support us and scaffold us enough to be brave, to build new connections and community, or that can help us take risks to let people in to see the vulnerable places inside of us. Because that can be part of building closeness is like, oh, I need to take some risks here. And what's going to support me to take some risks? my bones, and the earth and my ancestors. Like, okay.
I love that. I'm on a Robin Wall Kimmerer kick right now. Just
Yeah.
finished braiding sweetgrass and then
Oh,
just
nice.
finished gathering moss.
Yeah.
And then I just listened to a podcast today with Ed Young talking about An Immense World, which I think I read last year. And there is just so much happening around us when we take a moment to recognize that it's even there.
Yeah.
And so much inherent interconnectedness with the land and everything that grows on it, and the seemingly inanimate things like the rocks and boulders and the air and the things that are surround us. That same thing, like I have very visceral experiences when I'm just outside with my bare feet on the grass. And it's such a simple reminder, and profound, I think, reminder that I might feel isolated, but I am far from alone.
Exactly.
And so I love that call and invitation to be reminded of that when we do feel isolated and alone.
Yeah.
You take some time to outline some common factors that are more likely to cause spiritual and religious trauma, and kind of these 5 C's, right? Of control, consequences, compliance, codependence, and culture. For those who are listening who might not be sure if they've experienced spiritual or religious trauma, or they've just never been able to name it before, would you share a little bit more about those 5 C's?
Yeah. The 5 C's are my way of summarizing what I've seen in real, like my experiences, in the experiences of my patients, in what the research literature says about what happens in abusive contexts. And they're just as much about saying, hey, these are some of the warning signs, as they are about saying there are lots of reasons why you stayed so long. Because I think a question that I often hear from people is, if it was so bad, like how, right? Like just a how question, like, how did this happen? What on earth went on that I participated in this thing and then also hurt other people, right? Hurt myself, was hurt, stayed. How did it happen? So recognizing that there are all sorts of systemic factors that are at play, usually in these small micro moments that accumulate over time to create something that feels kind of normal for us. Like breaking it down and slicing it differently to figure out, okay, what's going on there, I think is part of answering that why question. So the first one, control, is a way of highlighting how much control is usually at the center of these abusive systems. And control is sometimes acquired because people accumulate control. They've been given power in some way, but sometimes it's taken and just kind of assumed, or sometimes we hand it to people. Like there can be lots of different ways that control is acquired, or being in a position where a person has that much power. Like how does that happen? There's lots of questions to be answered there. But I think the really important factor is that control is usually at the center of these traumatic contexts or these abusive religious spheres. And that means that there is some sort of power that's enacted over people that restricts certain ways that they live. Control is just as much about saying, this is who you need to be, and this is how it needs to happen, as it is about saying, you cannot be these things. These things are unacceptable. And who decides? Usually the person or the power or the system that's in control. Now, all of those rules about who you should be and who you shouldn't be really are meaningless unless there are some consequences that are provided for you, right? If someone just came up to me and said, don't do this, I'd be like, no, okay, like you're not the boss of me.
Yeah.
Like if somebody just decided to start telling me, like, something kind of really bizarre, like if you go into your garden after 5:00 on Wednesdays, then everybody in your family is going to suffer eternally in a fiery pit. It would be absolutely bizarre. But if someone says, right, that piece, like, oh, these people that you care about are going to suffer, all of a sudden the control starts to make a lot more sense. So the consequences and the control are tied to each other. If we are told, here are the things about who you're supposed to be, what you're supposed to do, what you're not supposed to do, and here's what's going to happen if you don't follow the rules, and it's going to be scary. I mean, it could be scary now. It could be scary for eternity. It could be scary for you. It could be scary for people you love. That really hooks in the fear part of us. And as a species, we are deeply motivated by fear and love. We are deeply motivated by belonging and, what threatens our survival. So if the consequences are about punishment to us, punishment to other people, real potential loss, like you could be rejected from this community and everybody is in this community, that's a pretty compelling consequence to kind of keep us in alignment with what's expected. And this is really kind of into the next section of things. Compliance and I would say the codependence go hand in hand, where it becomes really, really hard to trust ourselves when we've been told by people in power that we are untrustworthy. But that makes it really convenient for them to keep telling us the things that are true, the things that we're supposed to do. So there's this I'm going to go along to get along. I'm going to be part of what's expected of me in order to belong. But in doing so, actually, I learn I can't trust myself, and I have to trust you to tell me who to be and what to do. And if I don't do that, then here are these consequences that I'm going to face. And there's this kind of like a colleague of mine, Dr. Preston Hill, talks about the connection between spiritual gaslighting and learned spiritual helplessness and outsourced moral authority. And the connection between all of those things is if we are kept in a position of believing that we are helpless spiritually, and we are able to outsource to another person the authority over our lives spiritually and otherwise, and what they tell us is that we can't trust ourselves, then it keeps us spiritually helpless. It keeps us deferring our spiritual authority to them, and they keep telling us, you're bad, you can't trust yourself. Those are kind of like the systems that are, or the factors that undergird the compliance and the codependence. Like this keeps me a part of a system, and it actually feels good. Like maybe I belong, like, oh, I'm doing it right. And the strange thing is that in doing it right, you get to make the rules, and what you're doing is you're telling me that I'm doing it wrong. So all of that is at play. Now, the larger thing to consider, and this might seem obvious to some folks, is none of this can go on unless it's situated in a culture where people are saying, like, thumbs up, this looks good, we're doing it too, right? You can even ask the question, like, how does clergy sexual abuse go on? Like, how does it happen? How does a pastor or a rabbi or a guru of any sort abuse people who are devotees, who are congregants, who are community members? Like, how is it happening at all? Well, usually there's a culture of silence or support around it. There's a culture that says, oh, we can't question leader. There's a culture that says, it's fine, don't ask any questions. There's a culture that says, if I speak up, that I'm going to get in trouble and I'm going to lose out and I'm going to face the consequences, and I don't want to do that. So it's unusual for a person, like a single person, to be experiencing harm in a system when there isn't also this incredible culture of condoning, supporting, allowing, silencing, ignoring around them.
They're complicit.
Yes, exactly.
In maintaining that culture and not wanting to upset the status quo. I love that you mentioned the question of how did you stay so long, or why did you stay so long? And I've been reading a lot this year about betrayal blindness. And Dr. Jennifer Freed and Alison Cook talks so much about it in her book, I Shouldn't Feel This Way, of just like this immense shame that we take on ourselves and this blame that we feel because we stayed so long. And I love also the grace that she extends when it's recognizing the survival mechanisms that we've put in place to deal with the consequences that are far too overwhelming. And there's to allow for, of course you stayed. They were your only community. Of course you stayed at that job because it was your paycheck. It was providing for your family. And they're like almost instantly when she said that to me, I felt the burden of shame go away, because I've been carrying it for years of like, I don't know why I stayed. I don't know why, like I should have gotten out sooner. And just recognize that there is a kindness that we can extend to ourselves when we recognize these 5 C's and feel the weight of having stayed in that system and culture for as long as we did, that you're out now, or maybe you're finding the agency to remove yourself now, right? And so in an effort to move toward that, you also write about pre, peri, and post-traumatic factors, which I thought was so helpful, and I hadn't heard anyone else talk about yet. Would you just help us understand what that is a little bit?
In trauma world, I think it's kind of a new conversation, as you're alluding to here, in terms of religious and spiritual trauma. But in the neurobiology of trauma land, kind of the traumatology conversation, pre, peri, and post-traumatic factors are what help us define why some trauma, why some, what we could even say is like stressors or acute events or stress events, why some of them go on to become stuck in the nervous system as trauma, whereas some of them, it seems, okay, that was a really stressful event. I was able to move through it and integrate it. And it feels like, yeah, I can remember and it was scary, but it doesn't feel like it's kind of living out in a way that's controlling my life in the present day. So again, trauma isn't just the bad things that happen. Trauma is also the way that the nervous system in the present is still telling the story as if we're back in the environment at that time. And there is a sense of it not being over inside of us. So pre-traumatic factors would be anything that happens before the trauma begins. And when we look at it from through the lens of a single incident trauma, let's just say, 20-year-old female, car accident. What was it like in her life leading up to that car accident event? How old was she? How many resources did she have? What was her community like? What was the story that she was given around suffering? How many positive attachment experiences has she had? Like, what's her sense of belonging? Even things like age and sex and gender can play a role in as pre-traumatic factors. And I'll say more about that in just a moment. And then we have peri-traumatic factors, which are what's going on at the time of the event. So what we know, let's say for a car accident, is there's a before and there's an after. With all trauma, that isn't the case. Sometimes with traumas, there's no before, there's no after. It's just a wasteland of terror. So the peri component is really significant when we're using language around trauma, because the trauma world still likes to talk about things primarily as these kind of like what we would call index events. It's like a thing that happened, but what happens when your entire life was the thing that happened, right? Yeah. But what we know in events, in terms of peri-traumatic factors, when there are qualities of relationship that are involved in the trauma, like did I get hit randomly by a log that fell in the woods, is going to feel different than if someone cut that log down and it hit me, versus if someone came after me, versus if someone who I was supposed to be cared for came after me. So all of the qualities of what happened at the time, kind of what are our assumptions around that? Did I dissociate? Did I lose consciousness? Do I remember? Do I not? Like, how long did it last? Those are some of the peri-traumatic factors. And then the post-traumatic factors are what happened after. So again, let's think about 20-year-old female car accident. Does that young woman have a doctor that she can talk to? Does she go home to her family? Do they pick her up from the hospital? Do they say, I'm so sorry that happened. That should have never happened. How do we keep you safe? What do we like? I'll step in. I'll take care of you. Or in the event of that experience, is she met with disbelief, judgment, blame? Is she alone? Does she have no time to go see a doctor? Does the doctor not believe her? Does her pain get worse? Is she not believed, right? All of the things that happen after. And how it relates to the context of spiritual and religious trauma is, again, it would be really nice and convenient if we can put a timestamp on when the thing happened. But for a lot of people, the experiences of injury go right back to some of their earliest memories of being told you're bad, right? You're sinful. Yeah. Here's proof of it. So then we can look at how traumas stack on top of each other. Let's just say that that's the peri or the pre-traumatic factor is also the peri-traumatic factor for something else. And then they experience an event later in life and they believe like, oh my gosh, I'm to blame. I'm bad. I'm the reason why. Yeah. Or they tell people about the thing that happened and their community says, well, just pray about it. Or like, God gave you this so you could join in Christ's suffering. Like the awful things that we tell people who are suffering. So the pre, peri, and post-traumatic factors are kind of a way of explaining why does some stuff stay stuck and sometimes it doesn't. But they're also a way of highlighting that for many people, there was no clearly defined before and after. It's just one thing after another that accumulate into what feels like terror, dissociation, shame, just all of the things that live inside of us. And it's part of my argument in saying that I think almost all spiritual trauma is complex trauma because there's no before, there's no after. It's injury after injury after injury.
That's helpful. If there's a resource I'm looking for to learn more about that, what would you recommend?
I write about it a little bit in The Wisdom of Your Body. Most of that comes from, I would say, like deep doctoral work in the fields of traumatology. So there aren't too many resources that I'm aware of that are related to that. But I'm guessing if you post this and someone knows of something, that they can get in touch with you or they can share it.
It's fascinating. So,
Yeah.
and I've always wanted to learn something about it.
Yeah.
I do appreciate, again, the care and the nuance around language. And towards the end of the book, you write that the word healing can even sometimes be haunted by the language of being healed, that we've so often defined healing as something going away. And so you offer these other options like recovery or remaking, which comes from the trauma community. And then you write, quote, instead, healing is the ability to attend to whatever is hurting, to turn toward where the injuries are, and patiently, with courage and clarity, let them be loved, and eventually to love them ourselves as they are, end quote. Tell us about what healing, or other alternate words now, mean for you or look like for us in the context of that idea.
Yeah. Healing is such a weaponized word in religious spaces, right? Because it's often used as proof of compliance. And that's where it gets really tricky. Like if you were healed, if the thing that hurt no longer hurts, if the injury is gone, if the disability no longer exists, then it's proof that you were good and you did what we told you to do. And so healing can feel like such a complicated word, which is part of why I think it's especially important to be tentative with it in this space. And in addition to that, I think healing, it doesn't really account for what is often experienced by complex trauma survivors, that there is no such thing as the thing that happened ever going away. There is no life in which you forget about it, where it is not part of what shapes your everyday motivations, passions, fears. And I think it's important to recognize that there is actually no going away of anything that's ever happened to us ever. Like every time I've had a wonderful meal and it's shaped my interest in eating that kind of food again, or I've gone on a trip and I've had an experience and it exposed me to something wonderful and beautiful, that has also changed me. There's no going back to before that, even of the beautiful things. And so recognizing that this narrative of healing has really been co-opted by the control in those communities.
Yes.
I think we need to see something that's more complex here when we're talking about healing, especially if we're trying not to co-opt healing through the lens of ableism, because there are many things in our world that culture or church has said are bad, but actually are just part of the like varied and complex and beautiful experience of being human. So when I think about healing and kind of what it means to me and the definition that I want to move towards, I really I'm not done with the word yet. I'm not done with the word. I'm not throwing the word out. I think we need to rehabilitate it. I often say like we need to heal our relationship to the word healing. That it means like building a new way of relating. And actually my understanding of healing comes from my understanding of what trauma is. Trauma means wound in the original Greek. And when I think about a wound, I think about something that gets pulled apart or fractured or separated. And if the injury is the separation, then maybe the healing is the connection. Then maybe the healing is the bringing together. It's the turning toward. So is it possible for us to experience healing in the presence of things that won't go away? Absolutely. But what does that look like? Maybe it's not that it goes away or that we go away from it. Maybe it's that we actually go towards it. Maybe the thing that remains is something that we become in relationship with. So a good example of this would be, okay, I still have places inside of me that feel like relics of really harmful religious environments. And sometimes they pop up and they surprise me. Am I going to try to rid myself of them and send them away and banish them? Well, maybe, but that actually doesn't prove to me that I like anything is really different. Like I'm just kind of like replicating inside of myself what was always modeled to me in those communities. So what could healing look like if not sending away? Maybe what it means is I learned to love those places, the places that I was told are bad or dangerous or sinful. What if I am in relationship with them? What would happen if I wrapped my arms around them and said, you get to belong here too. And I understand you and I want to listen to you and I want to take care of you. And that could be something we do with younger parts of us, but that could also be something we do with the versions of us that are still carrying the terror of the traumas that we've lived through, the parts of us that feel scared and wake us up screaming in the middle of the night, or give us the nightmares, or give us the kind of like the overwhelming freeze response. There is something inside of us that actually, in referencing our conversation earlier about nature, is like the ocean that can be wide enough to surround and hold the places that are full of terror, to say, you can tell me how scared you were for as long as you need to, and I will listen. I will not stop listening. I will not send you away. You can be scared, and I'll be here listening to every bit of it.
And what would it look like if, instead of creating more exiles for ourselves, that we move towards this integration of all these broken, wounded parts?
Yeah.
I love that you mentioned that we can't heal from control by controlling what healing looks like. I love that whole section. You say we don't mend the wounds of perfectionism by trying to do it perfectly, and all these other pieces. How do we catch ourselves and grow in this awareness of our own white knuckling our way through things and move toward that kind of acceptance that makes space for different habits to form that aren't so controlling? Because our defense mechanisms, right? They're just, they've been trying to help us, but they often do the opposite.
Right. I think, for me, a big piece of this has been recognizing that when I'm in these certain kinds of zones, there are sensations and postures and like embodied qualities to them that when I am approaching something rigidly, I often feel the rigidness or the tightness in my body. So there can be cues outside of our thinking or our meta reflection that indicate like, hey, you might be doing it the same way I always did. Like you're gripping that really, like quite literally you're journaling, but you're gripping your pen super tight, or your shoulders are tight. So I'm always coming back to the body. Like, is there flexibility in my body? Is my body feel soft and available to flex, to adapt, to adjust around this? Like that might tell me that I'm actually able to do that cognitively as well. And I don't know if we can do any of this alone. Like, I don't know if we can do it alone. And so pushing ourselves to read material that stretches us out of, one way of thinking, hearing different points of view, having friends speak into us. Like, are you seeing, or even therapists, like a question that I get asked a lot and that I like to dig into is, how is your approach to healing replicating the pattern of dysfunction? Like, we would call that a parallel process. Have you actually just taken the same pattern over here that you was used to hurt you? And are you doing that, but you've put some different language on it? Like, now I'm deconstructing, but with the same rigidity and force and in out and like us them mentality. Like, oh, I can see some parallels. Sometimes we can't see those on our own, but having other people help us can be useful. But recognizing if that's the thing that hurt me, the perfectionism, what's the alternative? Like a flexibility, creativity, the gray, the not knowing. Okay, what would it look like to actually espouse that in my relationship to myself? It might sound like this. It might sound like, I don't have to know. Okay, so I can say that to myself. I don't have to know. Or it might sound like I don't have to do it perfectly. Like there is such thing as good enough. Like finding language that kind of starts to form a new groove. But I mean, I wish I could say that there was a way to do this without the body, because I think that would be a lot easier for some people. The truth is, like, our bodies really have so much to say about how to be flexible, creative, expressive. And I really can't think of anything outside of therapy or psychedelics that has been as helpful for me in this process as dance. Like to move my body in unstructured ways, to let my body get connected to rhythm, because there's something about like, and not even choreographed dance, but nonlinear, ecstatic, authentic movement. Like, whoa, my body knows how to not do things perfectly. And actually it can feel like a hell of a lot of fun. And when I connect with the pleasure of doing it imperfectly and the creative expression that comes along with it, and I connect to more parts of myself, I realize my body my body knows the way to do the integrating journey without it, reinforcing some of those systemic factors all along that were there all along.
Yeah. And I would love to end with that I came across you because of your body-based approach, right? Which I so love and appreciate. And there are so many great practices in your book. And would you be willing to lead our listeners through some kind of exercise that they can do with their body as they're processing all of this?
Yeah. Absolutely. So I'll share one and then we can do one together. The one that comes to mind just in light of what we were saying is to put shape to what's inside. Like sometimes there are places inside of us and in our stories that have no words, but we can connect with them. And so as you're listening to the conversation, is there something that stands out for you? And then if you were to take that something that stands out to you and give it a shape with your body, what shape would that be? Right? So that's the prompt for listeners, and I'm sure I'll do it later today. I'm often making shapes like, oh, this is how it feels. And you could do that too, Brian. But the thing that'll lead us through here that I think in line with our relationship with nature focus in this conversation is I'd love to lead us in a little moon breath exercise. And if it feels good for you, Brian, and I'll do this, and anyone who's listening along, you're welcome to close your eyes as long as you're not driving or, on the treadmill or something like that. You can always pause this and come back to it later. Just as you move your body into a position that feels sturdy and supportive, just invite you to notice that you're breathing. And as you're breathing, you might begin to separate your body or your breath into 4 quadrants. So you might notice the inhale, and we'll call that waxing. You might notice the point at the top of your breath that feels really full. It's often something we don't give a lot of attention to, but there's actually a space right there at the top, and we'll call that the full. And then there's the exhale, which we'll call the waning. And then there's that spot at the very bottom between the exhale and the inhale, and we'll call that new. And just see as we travel around the breath as if it's a cycle itself. You can notice each of those 4 different sections, recognizing the power of the full, the bursting, the expansive, maybe even the pressure that comes with it, and what seems like the nothing or the empty that's in the new. That space where it seems like nothing's happening. And it could be an ending, but it could be a beginning. Just as you travel around the cycle of breath a few more times, my invitation for you is to start to notice which one resonates with you. If you felt drawn to one of them, just giving yourself over to that without even having to come up with a reason for why, just noticing your body's leading you towards some kind of something that feels good or is doing something. Recognizing that one thing you're drawn to is actually part of the family of all of the phases, that they're all actually happening at every moment inside of you. And in this way, your body is like nature. There is a rhythm inside of you. There's a cycle inside of you. Every single moment as you take a breath that mirrors what's happening outside of you. It's such an important reminder of our not aloneness. When you think about these moments of feeling like, oh, am I the only one who's grieving, who's letting go, whose heart is breaking, your exhale reminds you that trees are doing that all the time. The moon is doing that all the time. The ocean is calling the waves back towards herself, away from the shore. And that moment where it feels like, am I alive? Am I dead? Is this the beginning? Is this the end? Nothing's happening. Why is nothing happening? You can remember that new moon space, that pause. And the inhale, the place where things are generating or beginning or growing, that's always available and alive inside of you. Nature knows that too. And then that full, it's like, oh, there's so much, I can barely hold it. I'm going to burst. I feel like I'm going to explode. Or like, wow, 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 everything is in bloom. That part of your breath reminds you that nature knows that too. That's inside of you and outside of you. And then we'll just take one more trip around this cycle and we'll come back to what's happening here.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Hillary, if people want to find you or connect with you, where can they look?
Yeah, so you can find me online on my website, Hillary L. McBride. I've got some resources on there and links to books and things like that. Also events that I have coming up. I usually post there on Instagram, and it's probably where I hang out the most, and Facebook and Threads and things like that. Hillary Leanna McBride is my handle. And hopefully if we haven't met, we'll see each other at some point in the future. All of your listeners, please come say hi if we're ever at an event. And we just want to put a face to a name. I'd love to get to know you and see you there.
Thank you so much. Everyone go get a copy of Holy Hurt wherever books are sold. We'll have the links for everyone in the show notes. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
What an incredible conversation. I'm so grateful for Hillary and for the work that she's been doing these past several years. If you enjoyed this as much as I did, be sure to follow Hillary and say thanks for being on the show. You can find links and all the things in the show notes. Coming up on the show this season, we have David Gate, Becky Castle-Miller, Zach Lambert, Dr. Ariel Schwartz, and so many more. Next time, we'll be talking with Karen Meredith about her new book, Church Camp. Subscribe or follow the show to get new episodes automatically. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a rating and review or share with your friends. It really helps us to grow and continue providing quality content for you. And thank you to everyone who made this show possible through their financial support. We truly couldn't do this work without you. Consider a donation today at the link in the show notes. This episode was hosted and executive produced by me, Brian Lee. Editing by Heidi Kritz. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to listen. I hope it's been helpful. Here's to moving toward healing and wholeness together. I'll see you next time.